Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from Alachua, Florida, we have Erin Amerman. Erin is the founder and president of Critter Creek Farm Sanctuary. Founded in 2016, the sanctuary has grown to become the largest bovine sanctuary in the United States. Welcome, Erin.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. That's quite an accomplishment, the largest bovine sanctuary in the United States. How did you start Critter Creek Farm Sanctuary?
Critter Creek Farm Sanctuary planning was in the works all the way back in 1997. I told my husband at the time, we had just gotten married, and I told him that we were going to need to buy at least 100 acres, and it was going to have a creek, because I wanted to start Critter Creek Animal Sanctuary. At the time, I didn't know what species of animals I wanted to rescue. I just knew that I wanted to rescue animals of some sort. As time wore on and we saved a bunch of money so that we could eventually buy property, it became pretty obvious that farmed animals were the most neglected, the ones who were treated the most poorly by society, and the ones who needed the most help. So in 2012, we purchased a property that was pretty heavily wooded. So it wasn't great for farmed animals, but we could keep it as a wildlife sanctuary. And then in 2015, there was an adjacent farm to the forest for sale, and we were able to purchase that. And since that was already set up for farmed animals, we had a great place to start. It was mostly set up for cattle, and we subsequently learned that cattle are very difficult to place. They take up a lot of space. Each cow should have at least an acre of land. More is recommended if you're up north. Mm-hmm. And cows also tend to come in groups. So say you're like a 5-acre sanctuary, you bring in 4 cows and you're full.
Wow.
So they tend to be very hard to place. So we had all this open space set up for cows, and so we just started taking them in, and then we kind of became the go-to people for everything bovine. Mm-hmm. By 2019, we realized that we needed more property because the need was so great and we were running out of space. So we purchased our second facility, which we call Critter Hills, because it's hilly, which we don't have a lot of in Florida. So we're kind of lucky here to be on this lovely hilly property. And Critter Hills property was also set up as a cattle ranch. It was a 200-acre cattle ranch. Mm-hmm. That allowed us to continue taking in more cows. And at this point, we have almost 150 bovine residents. So we're pretty full now at both facilities.
Back in 97, when you told your husband, what was his reaction?
He kind of just, he nodded and smiled. I think he thought that I would forget or maybe lose interest or move on to something else. And he was wrong. But thankfully, he's been very happy to come along for the ride and has never, he does sometimes try to be the voice of reason, but he's never been anything but supportive and invested.
Now, in 2019, you and your husband, Chris, gave up the idea of your dream house to create Critter Hills. How did that feel?
You know, we had been saving money for a long time to build a Victorian house, Victorian-style house. There aren't a lot of those in Florida that are already made. So if you want a Victorian-style house, you pretty much need to build one. And I've been wanting something like that ever since I was a little kid. I've had this fascination with Victorian-style houses. So we were going to build one in the middle of the Critter Creek property in the forest. But we realized that, we had all this money saved up over the past 20 years. And we could either do something to make ourselves happy or we could save more animals. And the choice, when you look at it like that, was pretty obvious. I'm still a little sad, I'm not going to lie, about my Victorian dream house going out the window. But when I look out my window and I see cows running by and I see a water buffalo sauntering past with his best friends and a bison and so on, it's clear that we made the correct decision.
How did you feel when that happened, when you made that decision to give up your dream in order to have another sanctuary?
I kind of looked at it as I was giving up on one dream to pursue another one. So there wasn't any kind of loss there. And in fact, the pursuing of the dream of making Critter Creek Farm Sanctuary larger, being able to save more animals, is much more meaningful in the grand scheme of things than having a pretty house. So, I did feel a little bit sad, but also very at peace because I knew that it was the right thing to do and that it would bring peace to so many other animals and life to so many other animals. So it was the right course for sure.
What is it about animals that made you start a sanctuary?
As far back as I can remember in my childhood, I just felt a special bond with all different kinds of animal species. I don't know what it is about them. I've always kind of preferred non-human animals to human animals.
Mhm.
Then the non-human animals don't judge, although cats do. Cats definitely judge you, but most of the other species are fairly non-judgmental. And I don't know, basically, there was nothing that made me happier than being surrounded by furry, feathery, and scaly critters. So I've just always had that affinity for them.
Can you take us through the process of starting your sanctuary? Did you intern or volunteer anywhere?
We did speak to some other farm sanctuaries to kind of get some advice and tour the places and see what their setup looks like. Mostly we dove into it a little blind.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not something that I recommend. It's not something that I normally do. I'm normally a very, very careful, thoughtful, planned out type of person. But the need arose for some cows to have a home. And so we took them. And then we learned as we went. I would normally recommend that people spend a good amount of time working with other sanctuaries, volunteering at sanctuaries, getting some animal care experience, because learning that sort of thing on the fly can be a little bit stressful. You always feel like you're behind and like you're kind of chasing the 8 ball.
Mm-hmm.
I think that 5 years into it, we're finally in a place where we have a good handle on issues of animal care, issues of infrastructure and maintenance, because that's animal care is, of course, a huge part of it, but the infrastructure is constant. Half of what we do is fencing repairs. So it's those sorts of things that I wish I had had a better idea of before we started, just so that we could know more and know what to do and how to do it. But I think for learning on the fly, we've done pretty well.
Can you give me an example of that?
An example of
Learning things on the fly.
Okay, well, for example, when you give cows medical care, especially when you have a lot of cows and they come to you sometimes almost feral. So imagine trying to give medical care to a feral cat or a feral dog even. Yes, they are domesticated species, but they are very distrustful of humans, and so they don't react well when you try to do things with them and to help them. So we learned very quickly that in order to provide medical care, we have to run the cows through what's called a chute. And it's kind of this long fenced area that terminates in a section that has something called a head catcher,
Mm-hmm.
where it holds their head in place so that you can draw blood or you can do a physical exam, and it keeps you safe and it keeps the cow safe as well. So in the process of learning this, we realized that cows can jump fences. Cows can actually jump really, really high.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to adjust our chute, reinforce the chute, build it higher after we had a few escapes. Thankfully, they just escaped into the pasture, so it's not like they ran away.
Right.
But still, it's hard to deliver medical care when they have jumped the fence and they're now in the pasture running away. We also learned about the importance of things like the head catcher gate, which we didn't have at first. So the cows could almost just jump out of the end of the chute. So that sort of not understanding what a cow is physically capable of doing, not understanding how high they can jump or how rough they can be on infrastructure. That was the sort of thing that we had to learn on the fly. And we have a really good system in place for both facilities now, and we can run them through the chute and do their health checks and fly sprays and vaccines and all that other sort of stuff pretty smoothly. But it definitely took us a while to get to where we could do it that smoothly.
What is it about cows that makes them the focus of your sanctuaries?
When we lived at our previous house, which is actually between our two facilities, between the Critter Creek and Critter Hills, we actually call it Critter Woods now because it's a very wooded area. When we lived there, we were down the road from just a local cattle operation, not some big factory farm or anything like that, just a local person who has cows. And we would notice that at certain times of the year, the cows would start crying. They would yowl for days. And eventually we realized that correlated to the times of year when the trucks came to take away the babies and to take away anybody else that was deemed a cull cow. So these herds were losing their family, they were losing their best friends, and they mourned it loudly for days. And seeing how, or hearing how much it hurt them, it's heartbreaking. And it made me want to do whatever I could in some small way to alleviate that hurt. And I know that the same thing happens with birds, the same thing happens with pigs and the equines and so on. But it was with the cows that I had that first experience. And so that was what really drove me toward the idea of helping cows. And at the sanctuary, we do have rescued pigs. We have horses and donkeys and a couple turkeys. But really our focus is bovines.
Now, when they were yelling for days, how did that make you feel?
Oh, it was crushing. It was absolutely heartbreaking. You want to go in and when you hear anyone in distress, be it another human, be it a dog, be it a cow, your instinct as an empathetic creature is to want to go and soothe them and make them feel better. But when they've just lost their family and their friends, there's absolutely nothing you can do. And besides that, these are cows who have had terrible experiences with humans. So the last thing they want is to come see another one of, those not cows coming their way, because they just associate that with bad things for good reason. So it's not only heartbreaking, but it leaves you feeling incredibly helpless and powerless, because you want to soothe them, you want to make things better for them, and you can't. So I hope at the sanctuary we can do that to some extent, make them happy, soothe them. But there are so many billions out there for whom we won't ever be able to do that. And that's a heartbreaking thing to realize.
Now, how far away were those cows?
Just about 1.5 miles or so down the road, maybe 2 miles. Things out in the country, distance gets weird out in the country.
Right.
And things that seem like they're just down the street, it turns out they're actually 5 miles away. So I would guess a couple miles, but it could be a little off there.
So a couple miles away, and you could hear them crying, yelling for days.
For days, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was deeply affecting, for sure. as much as it affected me, the effect that it was having on them was obviously far worse.
What did you learn from that experience?
I went vegetarian when I was 14 because I realized that the stuff that was on my plate were the animals whom I already loved. So I already had an appreciation for animals as individuals and sentient beings. But that experience really opened my eyes to not only how much cows and other creatures like this are, how similar they are to the dogs and cats we already love, but also how similar they are to us.
Mm.
We mourn when we lose a friend, when we lose a family member, and their grief was so palpable and it felt very familiar. You know, I could relate to it in a way that I maybe didn't necessarily expect to be able to relate to it.
Now, you mentioned when you were 14, you became vegetarian. How and why did you transition to a plant-based diet?
I'm embarrassed because I went vegetarian at age 14 because I wanted to not hurt animals. I didn't wear any animal-based products, no leather, I didn't eat anything that was derived from animal flesh, like gelatin and that sort of stuff. But I didn't ditch eggs or dairy. And I had it in my head that cows just make milk and you have to milk them. I had it in my head that, well, chickens lay the eggs, and what are you going to do with the eggs? I would only buy the, quote, free range eggs, which come to find out that isn't a thing either. But I thought, I bought the brainwashing that society has put upon all of us for so many years, for like 25 years almost. And when we started the sanctuary, I was still just vegetarian at the point. Started looking at animals who would need rescue potentially. And I found out that there were these dairy calf underground railroads. I thought, what in the world? Why does a dairy calf need an underground railroad? This is crazy. And so for the first time, I looked into what the dairy industry actually does. And I went plant-based immediately.
When was that?
That was about 5 years ago.
Mm.
So it was like right around the time when we were just starting the sanctuary, when we were looking into all of the logistics of getting it up and running. I'm embarrassed and I'm kind of horrified at myself that I participated in such an exploitative system for so long without understanding what I was contributing to. For like 20 plus years, we only bought soy milk and we substituted a lot of plant-based products for dairy products, but not all.
Mm.
And, I was never like a big cheese addict or I never liked milk, period. But I loved ice cream and there wasn't very good vegan ice cream at the time. So I thought, well, at least I'm not killing the cows.
Right.
And then come to find out all these years later that I was completely wrong. So I went plant-based immediately. At the time, we had already stopped buying any eggs from the store. We would only eat eggs from the people we knew who had the backyard chickens. Yeah, but we stopped that as well because I decided that if I was so blind to the abuses of the dairy industry, then I was certainly blind to what was going on with the egg industry as well. So we looked into that and we researched the backyard chicken thing, and it's just as bad. So
right.
Immediately plant-based, never looked back, never regretted it. I only regret that I didn't do it back when I was 14, when I first thought that I was doing what I needed to do to help animals.
Can you explain to us the Dairy Calf Underground Railroad?
What I didn't know for so long, it's it's embarrassing that I never thought about this. My background is science. I'm actually a textbook author of human anatomy and physiology textbooks, and I have a biology degree as well. So I know physiology, and I know mammalian physiology, and yet it didn't occur to me that just like in a human, a cow will only produce milk if there's a baby.
Mm.
And in order to keep the production of milk up, they need to have a baby every year. So the cows are forcibly impregnated. They're pregnant for 9 months. And then as soon as the baby is born, the baby is ripped away. If the baby is a female, she'll be put in what's called an isolation hutch, where she's bottle fed until she's old enough to become pregnant herself. If the baby is a male, he's basically considered a waste product. And it used to be that they would all go to veal farmers. Nowadays, there's such a stigma around veal that the market for that has dropped considerably. So rather than selling most of them to veal farmers, they either send them straight to the slaughterhouse right after they're born, or they shoot them in the head.
Hmm.
And so there are activists and rescuers throughout the country who will work with farmers to see if they'll release the boys at least, and then they try to find sanctuaries for them. So that's kind of colloquially known as the Underground Railroad for the dairy calves. Unfortunately, it's not a sustainable system at all, because millions and millions and millions of dairy calves are bred into existence every year.
Right.
And there's only so many sanctuaries. There's only so many private homes who are able to take in dairy calves as well. So it's going to reach a point where there's a cap. A friend of mine who does this kind of rescue refers to the dairy farms as puppy mills, because they just keep churning out these calves. And these are usually like the small local farmer types who are willing to give up the calves. The large industrial farms, they won't give calves up. They just shoot them or slaughter them. So there's this real need to find homes for these calves from the farmers who are willing to surrender them. The homes are going to run out. And so the greater need is to change the industry, or just get rid of the industry entirely, change over to some sort of plant-based milk. And the only way to do that is to get people to stop buying it.
What does the work of someone like Jason from Destination Liberation mean to sanctuaries?
Jason is actually the person who calls them puppy mills.
Mm.
We've become really good friends with Jason. He has brought us 3 dairy calves. He does really great work, and he partners with sanctuaries all over the country, and also private residences all over the country, to try to save as many of these innocent babies as he possibly can. The animal rescue community really relies on all parts of the puzzle working together. So we have the rescue organizations like Jason, or like larger ones, the Humane Society or the SPCA, and they're the ones who function to take the animals out of the either abusive situation or the one where their death is imminent. And then the sanctuaries are the ones who provide the forever homes and take care of the animals for the duration of their lives. So that kind of partnership between the rescue organizations and the sanctuaries is really critical to fulfilling the overall mission of just saving as many lives as we possibly can.
The mission of your sanctuary is to promote compassion for farm animals through rescue and education. Can you give us an example of how you achieve this?
The rescue part is kind of self-explanatory. We take in animals who have usually suffered some sort of abuse or neglect, or they were imminently to be slaughtered. But the education and outreach part, that is accomplished in a number of different ways. We have people come out to the sanctuary. We really firmly believe that the animals are their own best advocates, and that if people can just meet them and get to know them, they will see that they're just like the animals they already love and want to protect. So we have monthly vegan farmers markets, or farmers markets, as we call them, where we have vendors come out and sell amazing plant-based food, and people can come in and meet the critters. They give the cows cookies, they give the pigs belly rubs, they pet the donkeys. We've had a very, very positive reception to these farmers markets. They also offer private tours. Pre-COVID, we held large events where we had like musical guests and all sorts of things like that. With COVID, we had to scale it back a little bit. And then the other arm of that outreach is through social media and the ability to tell stories with other organizations like the Dodo. The Dodo has even though they are not a not-for-profit company, they're still a company that has a huge reach, millions and millions and millions of social media followers.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been able to share some of our rescue stories via the Dodo and have had a really good success with that. We've shared the story, for example, of Eli and Marley, who are a calf and piglet duo who were actually brought to us by Jason Bololek. Eli was a discarded dairy calf, and Marley was a piglet who jumped off of a transport truck in North Carolina, and she wound up at one of our partner sanctuaries, Sisu Refuge. And their kind of specialty is pigs, but they were very, very full. And so they needed to find placement for this little piglet. They nursed her back to health and basically saved her life.
Mm-hmm.
So Jason was transporting Eli from Vermont down to us, and he figured he would just swoop in to North Carolina on the way and pick up the piglet and bring them both. And on the way down, they both sort of imprinted on each other, and they formed this really strong friendship. And it's a friendship that remains to this day. I guess we're like a year and a half later now. And so we were able to share that story on the Dodo, and we got a lot of messages after that saying that people had gone plant-based because they couldn't look at meat, and dairy products the same way after seeing that. So social media is a very powerful medium for storytelling and for communicating messages like that.
Now at Critter Creek Farm Sanctuary, you have a water buffalo, cows, pigs, horses, even a bison.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are some of the special challenges that some of these animals create?
The water buffalo is about 3,000 pounds. And he's very, very smart, which is unfortunate sometimes because he's so smart that it's a little bit like a toddler, like a really smart toddler, and they know what they want and they don't get it. And so they throw a tantrum, except it's a 3,000 pound tantrum. He's very sweet, very friendly, very gregarious. But he's also a little dangerous. So we've had to kind of up our safety precautions when dealing with him. We can't bring any kind of food or anything into the fields because he'll basically knock the buggy over if he
Really?
doesn't get the treat that he wants. Yes, he's very, very close to tipping it over. There's actually like holes in the vinyl of the seats where he's ripped his horns through. And then Cinnamon the bison, even though she is a tame bison are not considered domesticated animals. They're wild animals. So dealing with her, it also requires very specific safety precautions because she's not 3,000 pounds. She's about 1,000 pounds. But 1,000 pound unhappy wild animal is not one you want to get in the way of at all. A lot of what we do, because the majority of the animals we take in are quite large, a lot of what we have to do is safety things and making sure that nobody gets hurt. In terms of like just providing care, cows and pigs are actually not that complicated. They get sick like anybody else, and we'll have to load them up and take them to the vet. But I think largely birds require a lot more specific hands-on care, especially birds like Cornish chickens,
mm-hmm.
Because they're bred to grow to slaughter weight in 6 weeks' time. And so their genetics are kind of messed up, and they require constant monitoring of their health and of what they eat and how much. And they are pretty labor intensive. But bovines and pigs are honestly much easier. We have some horses that we took in from another sanctuary, and the 11 horses that we have are more work than 150 bovines combined.
Really?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because horses are very, very high maintenance. We are not horse, like my husband and I are not horse people. I had no experience with horses whatsoever. We were asked to take in these horses because the other sanctuary was in kind of a dire situation. And we were like, we don't know what we're doing, right? This is not the best place for them, but it was their only option, so they came here. So we had to learn very quickly what to do with horses. And thankfully, one of our cherished team members is brilliant with horses. So she's taught us a lot, and she really got the horses kind of tuned up and in a good state. But most of them are draft horses. So they have big hoof problems. They have issues with things like weight gain. Even though they just eat grass, they still can gain weight on that. The horses injure themselves constantly, so there's always somebody on antibiotics or getting wound care, or they stick their hooves through the fence, or a couple of them like to play in the troughs, which always breaks the troughs. But it can also ding up the area around their hooves, so they have to get pulled out and have their little wounds taken care of, and then we let them back out, and then they do it again. Horses are just very high maintenance.
You were mentioning Seymour the water buffalo and some of the other animals. How do they choose their companions?
That's kind of a mystery. I guess it's the same way that we choose our companions. It's that they're compatible. They like them. Their personalities go well together. It's the same way that we choose our friends. It's not something that I think is easily explained for any species. Seymour is really, really bonded with these two female Holstein cows, and they go absolutely everywhere together. The two Holstein cows came together. They were rescued by an activist from a dairy farm down in South Florida when they were babies. So those two are absolutely inseparable. Where one goes, the other goes. But when Seymour arrived, for whatever reason, they just thought he was super cool. and they have stuck to him like glue ever since. So if you're looking for Seymour and you see Mary and Florence, it's like, oh, he's got to be over there somewhere, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cinnamon the bison arrived, and for whatever reason, she found Mary and Florence, the two Holsteins, to be amazing. And she's less sold on Seymour. She doesn't think that he's all that great, but he loves those two cows. And so anywhere that Seymour goes, you end up having the bison because you also have the two cows. So they form this odd little family unit. And what makes them get along, what makes them love each other and be bonded, I don't know. It's just the same thing that makes us be bonded to our friends and our family.
Now, getting back to your plant-based story, were there positive changes that you noticed both mentally and physically when you changed?
Physically, there's so much vegan junk food out there, and it's so easy to eat the good vegan junk food, like the plant-based ice creams. And in town, we have this vegan bakery called Joyfully Baked that makes insane vegan donuts. I wouldn't say that I noticed the health changes immediately. I had to stop the vegan junk food and go to more of a whole food type diet. And that's when I noticed, wow, I feel so much better when I'm not eating this garbage. But mentally, there was for sure, honestly, there was a lot of guilt because I couldn't believe that I contributed it for so long. But there was a definite weight lifted. Okay, I did this for so long, but I'm never going to do it again. And now I can work towards saving as many animals and helping as many people go plant-based as I possibly can. So there's this feeling that even if I'm not eliminating cruelty, at least I know that I'm not actively participating in it. And so that's kind of a mental weight lifted.
What is one thing that's exciting you right now with Critter Creek Farm Sanctuaries?
That's a good question. Apart from the animals, who are always exciting, I'm always thrilled to look out my window and see a cow walking past. I think that our reach has expanded significantly. And with that expanded reach comes more opportunities to share the animals' stories and to help people see them as sentient, emotional beings. So we've got probably over 50,000 at this point social media followers, and that number trends upward every day. So having the opportunity to share these stories with more people who do not follow a plant-based diet. We love the fact that we have so many vegan followers, but we also would really like to get people interested in our social media who are not vegan, who haven't made that connection yet, because fostering that connection is the best way in the long run to help as many animals as possible. We can only ever take in so many critters here. But if we can get people to stop eating them and eating their bodily secretions, we'll be able to help so many more in the long run. And we do get messages a few times a week. We'll get messages saying that somebody has gone vegan because of our stories and other sanctuaries and so on. So I think that's an exciting feeling. It makes it seem like we're making a dent in the problem.
What book or cookbook have you gifted most to somebody transitioning to a plant-based diet?
There are some good ones out there, and it kind of depends on what they're interested in. How Not to Die is a big one for people who are interested in the health aspects. Then there are a few others. There's some classics like Eating Animals, if somebody is interested in the animal aspect. I will recommend also things like documentaries, because not everybody likes to read nowadays. Our attention span has gotten shorter. So I'll recommend documentaries. Again, it kind of depends on their interest. Game Changers is a good one for the sporty types and the athletes. And then, of course, there's the Dominions and Earthlings, which are very painful to watch, but I wish people would, so that they could see what actually goes on behind the scenes. And failing that, I will ask people to follow sanctuaries, and not just ours, but any sanctuaries out there, so that they can start to get to know the animals on an individual basis. Because, like I said earlier, I do think that the animals are their own best advocates, and it's making the connection with the individual creatures, I think, that helps to shatter that cognitive dissonance that has been programmed into all of us.
Now, finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you became vegan, and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
I think that the word would probably be, for both cases, I think it's the same word. The word would be motivated. Even pre-vegan, I was motivated to do whatever I could to help animals. That was my long-term life goal. I had a job, and I had stuff that I had to do to make money and whatever, so that I could buy the properties to save the animals. But that was always the end game, was save animals, because that was what motivated me to do everything basically in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then becoming vegan and learning the truth about the industries that I was participating in made me even more motivated to do more and go bigger and help in whatever way I possibly can. So that's probably an unusual answer. But that I'm kind of a go big person. Like, I don't like to just settle for small. I want to go bigger and then bigger and then bigger. Like, I won't be satisfied until sanctuaries aren't needed anymore because no animals are exploited. And I will want to continue to go big until that is accomplished, which of course is not going to happen in my lifetime, but I'm going to be motivated to continue to work for it. So I think going vegan helped me immediately to understand the actual magnitude of the problem, and made me even more motivated to save as many animals as I possibly could.
It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Can you share with our listeners where they can find you on social media, Instagram, the web?
Of course. And thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. We are CritterCreekFarmSanctuary.org. That's our website. On Facebook, we are Critter Creek Farm Sanctuary. And on Instagram, we are Critter Creek Farm Sanctuary. So we're very easy to find.
That's it. Easy to find. Thank you again for being on Plant Your Seed, Erin.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.